Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Today on the podcast, Catherine and I are going to talk about something that a lot of companies don't understand, and that's the role of sales in the marketing process. Let me say that another way. The thing we miss is that sales is not separate from the marketing process, but it's an important part of the marketing process. And when you understand why this is true, it allows you to connect sales and marketing efforts in a way most people don't even think about. And if you're wondering, this really matters? Or it's just another guy's opinion, then listen to the stories we share about how changing your mindset can create way more sales. And that's what we all want. So if that sounds good to you, then let's jump in. When it comes to marketing and sales, sales is actually a critical part of the marketing process.
It is indeed.
And when we think about sales, more often than not, people think it's separate. There's marketing and there's sales.
Mm-hmm.
And there's marketing and there's advertising. And as we've talked about in other episodes, people don't realize or don't think about the fact that marketing is actually the entire process or the entire company seen from the customer's perspective.
Said one Peter Drucker.
Peter Drucker.
And he was a very smart guy.
Very smart guy.
Absolutely.
Wrote lots of books and everything else. And so when Drucker talks about that, that is actually a really powerful definition that we've used for a couple of decades now.
Absolutely. And aligning marketing and sales is a really big deal. Because if they're not aligned, you end up with marketing people doing things and salespeople doing other things, and you end up with a lot of inconsistencies across the board. So one company we used to spend some time with called it Smarketing.
Yes, we can name them. They were HubSpot. I don't think they use it anymore, but they were trying to deal with the issue of marketing and sales need to communicate together. They need to work together. They don't just pass off, but they intertwine a little bit. And we'll talk more about how we think that actually is true, but it's probably important to just understand, what do we mean by sales and what does that look like?
Yeah. So what do we mean by sales? Because sales can be done in multiple different ways, especially in the world that we currently live in, right?
In the world we live in, it's crazy because you've got really two different kinds of sales, or what you have is you actually have at least two different ways we can look at sales. One involves an actual human being.
And say it isn't so.
So like your
human sales?
Your sales force. But the other one is electronic. Mm-hmm. I mean, a perfect example is e-commerce sites. And then you can move that into service-based, but you have a website that is basically your salesperson. You presents the products. It's like, well, our parents' generation, it's like catalogs. It's like catalog shopping in the old Sears catalog, except it's online now.
Yeah.
But it is really, in the sense, the premise and the concept is there. The catalog was a salesperson. The website is a salesperson. And when you go to Amazon, you never talk to a human being.
No.
Their website is that salesperson process, the experience, the continuity, how it lays out. Every product, no matter who offers it, lays out the same way. A salesperson, if an actual human being is having conversations, they actually are the same thing. Can they create consistency? How do they build rapport? How does that relationship happen? And so it's important when we're talking about sales and its role. What do we mean by sales? And it could be either of those two. Absolutely. And there's probably a third starting to happen. Well, there is a third starting to happen, and that is AI. AI is starting to create digital salespeople, digital sales voices, sales calls. And now the United States has banned digital sales calls from a robo calling system. So basically an AI can't make phone calls to a whole list of certain categories because it was starting to become overwhelming quickly.
Yeah.
And the trust factor is high. So AI will play a role, and it's kind of like an electronic version of the website, except the website's static in many ways, and the AI is going to be more interactive. And those,
well, and even the interactive, the widgets that you put in your website where the chat stuff is back and forth, and the initial pull through is AI, right? Just to vet and to.
Well,
and
we used to call it bots.
Yep.
And those early bots were programmed, and now the AI can think enough. You know this, but our listeners might not. We have a license to a software right now that we are in sort of beta with, but it is actually really good at having a conversation once it gets over a few hiccups that are not quite real yet. But we have tested it, and people don't know they're talking to a computer.
Yeah.
And it is crazy. And then there's this whole do you do that? Because if somebody finds out that they've been tricked
Mhm.
into thinking it's a human and it's not, then they feel foolish.
Yeah. And that's
And
a hard
so,
place to be.
so we've got these basically, let's say the human being and an electronic version, and then variations of electronic are the different, what we mean when we're talking about sales and business.
Yeah. And within that variation, there's things like a landing page for a big ticket type of item, right? Which is a completely different type of sale
Yeah.
than just buying a product, for example. So those are the kinds of differences within that online sales process.
Yeah. And we always say that you need, the more money you spend and the bigger the impact is of the sale, usually two
Mhm.
things happen. It costs more and the sales cycle takes longer.
Yep.
More touch points, more things are needed. And so when you're thinking about sales, you're thinking about how do you set all these things up so it's more effective, more productive, you have better phone calls or better visitors to your landing page. But then you have really the need for human beings kind of falls into, well, let's talk about 3 different types of human beings.
Tall, short.
That's probably not the way I should say it. Let's talk about 3 different types of sales situations, which would require 3 different types of qualifications that we would all call salespeople.
Mhm.
The first one is something you did before we ever started Half a Bubble Out, and that's more of a complex sales.
Very complex.
Talk about summarize what was that like when you did that and what did it entail?
Yeah. So I worked for a high ticket software company where we sold into government and various nonprofit type sectors. And it was accounting and HR payroll software. So
Very stimulating, exciting.
very
product.
stimulating. Hey, you know what? Golden Gate Bridge was one of my clients.
It
And
was.
that was fun. But within that, we had basically a whole RFP process, request for proposal. So we weren't able to just like pitch people, but we had frontline cold callers that would tee things up, right? And then by the time I got involved, there had been some sort of a process going on with a pre-sales rep. And then I would get involved and we'd have conversations and that kind of thing. But it was a very complicated sale. And the biggest issue that I remember seeing between marketing and sales was that marketing ended up they had this tendency to want to create solutions to questions that nobody was asking or to problems that nobody had.
Was that marketing or was that the R&D or the development people?
That was probably more the R&D and development people.
Because there was then you had 3 different groups competing and that was a larger company model, right?
Definitely.
Selling to large, your territory was across the United States.
Yep.
And so you had people designing stuff that they kind of expected people to sell, whether they needed it or not or wanted it or not.
Yes, and not very good marketing in between. So it was an interesting experience.
And in that company, you had a marketing department that was actually a sales department, the way I would define it, that was called marketing.
Yes.
In that context, marketing was a very, very, very narrow.
It was trade shows and a few pamphlets. So that was really that was the whole thing.
And what we're talking is this whole concept, as we've said in other videos, there's a foundation that needs to happen of knowing the company plan, the direction, knowing who the customer is, knowing who the products are, and all that kind of stuff, designing it, making sure advertising and marketing. That was another video that we walked in on. How do you actually let people know and build those impressions?
Yep.
And in this video, we're talking about sales. And that company didn't do it, but there was a complex system that actually had a very long sales cycle. Do you remember the longest sales cycle? What would you think the longest sales cycle you had in that?
Probably 18 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of conversation, a lot of discussion. It's not going to be done quick.
Nope.
It costs way too much money. The process is complicated. It's not going to be done on a website or through an AI app.
No, definitely not.
Right.
Definitely not.
Then you have the second level of sales that is more like going into an appliance store or something like a Best Buy, where you're walking in and you're trying to pick up a computer, a stereo, speakers, or maybe an appliance. You're walking in, you're going to look for the salesperson. Their job is just to be there. They have some specialty in knowing about the different features.
Right.
Have they owned them all? No. Have they used them all? No. Have they been there very long? Maybe not.
Depends on the day.
These people are salespeople, and that's a sales process.
Absolutely.
And you get hired into that sales process, but it's more of a It's much less sophisticated. The timeline is much smaller.
It's a little less consultative.
You're there just
the
to help.
process that we were in,
Like-
and even in what we do here, is more consultative.
Yeah. Do you want a
Right.
Samsung or an LG? I mean,
Here's the pros and cons.
Here's the pros and cons.
Yeah.
It's a buyer warranty
Yeah.
because one of them's going to break. Probably both. Then you have your third one where literally you go to the counter, you just go, hey, I need this. And
Right.
oftentimes we've referred to the salespeople. They have to take your name, the information, they take your money.
They're order takers.
They're order takers. But
Yep.
we refer to them all at some level of sales.
Yep.
And then you have people like, well, different restaurants and stuff like that now, chain restaurants. You can walk in and you can talk to the one person in line and they can take your order, or you can go to the kiosk and put in your order
Yes.
and never ever talk to
Never,
the person.
ever talk
Now
to
you're
the
kind of
person.
mixing these things in brick and mortar.
Mm-hmm.
It's great when the line's long and you know exactly what you want. You're comfortable with it.
Yeah. And in a higher end restaurant, your wait staff are often consultative salespeople who are trying to upsell you.
And they are part of the
And
experience.
that's part of, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, you can't
absolutely.
you can't easily ask a computer, well, what does the chef recommend today?
Yes.
Unless they've gone out of their way to
Pre-program that.
program that, and then it's kind of lame. So we have those different levels of sales, and so when we're realizing we're talking about in the sales thing, it's actually the word sales has a diverse amount of meaning and context depending on what the situation is, the business, the
Yep.
product you're selling.
But in every case, regardless of what it is, what matters is that things align across the sales and marketing experience for the customer, right? Because it's when things get out of alignment that it gets really messy.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean by that?
So if you've ever sort of, let's just go to something like radio. So
Mhm.
you hear an ad and it describes a product or an experience, but then you go to check in on that further, and whatever you see first, just like it loses something in the translation. It doesn't carry, we would call it carry the scent through.
Yeah.
So that
What's the
it's
worst?
that.
What's the worst case scenario you can think of? I know we've experienced things where you're just like, this can't be the right place. I mean, the worst case scenario is they had the logo wrong, they had everything was different. Then you show up and you're like, complete false advertising.
Yeah.
This is a great, beautiful ad. You show up and it's a sketchy place. And you're like, where am I? And how is this?
Yeah.
Well, they were trying to put their best foot forward, their best face forward.
Right.
They have multiple faces, obviously. That whole concept of, is it a line or not? And that false advertising is the epitome of what we mean by it looked this way and this way. But what happens more often than not is it's like, it's muddy. It's not clear. Well, we just changed it a little bit. We stretched the logo. Well, we thought these colors would be better. We
changed the messaging. I mean,
a large company, and all of a sudden the stores, the messaging is nice and clean. You go into all the stores and they're like, they're not kept up or they're not taken care of. And so you have this discontinuity between messaging and experience, or different messages that you see that actually don't always ring true. Sometimes you're like, is that a different company? Is that a competitor? In advertising? Because it can be different enough. Competitor could come in and try and be really close. Is that the same thing? Is it not?
Yeah.
That doesn't help build impressions or trust.
Yeah.
A perfect example in digital advertising. When we talk about that or we experience that, why do we talk about scent so much in digital advertising?
Well, I think because regardless of what you're selling, you're still selling to a human being. And the goal ultimately is to win the heart of that human being.
Yeah.
Because if you can win the heart, then the mind follows. Because we justify with our minds what we've already decided with our hearts. So anytime we introduce discontinuity or we lose the scent, we're missing an opportunity to build trust. And we're actually diminishing our movement forward in terms of understanding what it takes to get a customer from somebody who doesn't know who you are all the way through purchasing and having the opportunity to delight them.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's the loss of trust and stuff along the way that's dangerous.
Well, and in the internet world, one of the things that happens that we're still not completely conscious about, because the mind tricks us, is moving from web page to web page. We don't always, there's such continuity in our minds because we think about it, but it's not unlike what happened in the beginning of motion pictures, where motion pictures, what they realized is if we could show 24 still frames, 24 photographs in a row in 1 second, the mind would perceive motion. So the mind would perceive continuity. In the internet, we kind of have that because we're so used to click and another page comes up and click and another page comes up. But it's almost as if what you're doing, an analogy is you're transporting somebody, like in a science fiction film, I'm going from this place to this place that are completely different.
Mhm.
If when I click the button and I end up on another page that isn't continuous, it doesn't have that continuity,
Mhm.
I then become, wait a minute, I'm unsure. Did I go to the right place?
Yeah.
Was this a link that is trying to cheat me from something? I mean, in today's world, trust is even harder on the internet because all the scams are
Ugh.
becoming even more real, more aware, even maybe more of them. So we saw that people who were really good at this were people in the early days, like major companies, like Victoria's Secrets was really good at this. Their print ads, their digital ads, they would have literally the same copy, the same font, the same picture
Mhm.
when you took you to a landing page and everything else. So you knew with great confidence you were there and
Yeah.
you would move much faster through the process. So all of a sudden it became more fluid.
Yeah.
Marketing activities are meant to do that for the sales process because the sales process is that next step in the marketing process.
Mhm.
And so when we get there, when I'm having a sales call, I can either have a cold call where somebody either went and interrupted somebody and I said, "Can we have a conversation?" Which I hate cold calling. I hate cold sales. Um, I did a lot of that when I was younger and it's really difficult. It's profitable if you can stay consistent. But what's
Yeah.
even better is you can have these higher quality conversations when people have heard about you. And we've built our company over the last 22 years on doing what we can to build relationships, to build connections, to have people hear about us
Mhm.
so that when we meet them, they go, "Oh, I've heard of you. One of the best things in the world." Or when we need help,
Yep.
we come to you because so and so told us about you, because we've heard your name in the community. We're aware of you. All these different things that are marketing, whether it's been PR or whether it's been advertising or whether it's been activating our user base, our customer base in referrals, then people come in with more trust. We have way more profitable conversations
Absolutely.
and we have much higher conversion rates.
Yep.
We also have a slower amount of leads that come in because we don't crank up the volume or crank up the dollars into the advertising machine for what we do. But that has been really beneficial. And when we work with e-commerce companies or something like that, our goal is to constantly, or any kind of service business, is to constantly build that reputation, the impressions.
Mhm. I mean, there's no more ideal sales conversation than the one that starts with the person in front of you saying, I have looked around, I have talked to whatever, and you are the only people who do what I need.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're ready. Those are the golden opportunities when they're already convinced, and the only thing you have to do is get them over the finish line.
Yeah. So you have this dynamic where you're actually engaged with somebody who wants it to be there. Now, this goes back to the whole premise for salespeople and your marketing as a larger picture that we want to win the heart.
Mhm.
You said something earlier about actually uh, people buy emotionally.
Mhm.
We buy first with the emotions and then we justify. Sometimes people struggle with that because, like, I don't do that.
Yep.
I'm intelligent. But what I want our listeners to think about, what I want everybody out there thinking about is that this is actually a writer downer. This is actually really important is people, when they come to you, unless you're cold calling, that's kind of an outlier. They come to you going, I want something. Yes, my mind is engaged, but I have a desire for
Mhm.
something and I'm hoping that you might have it. I really don't want to go to 5 different places.
Mm.
I want you to have what I need. I want it to come in a way that's not real difficult to get, to purchase. I want it to be within the right price range, and I want to like you.
Mhm.
I want there to be no friction, and the more you like somebody, the more greased the system is, the process is, the less friction there is.
Absolutely.
And so when we can do all these things, our customer, that's what we mean by we buy with emotions and then we come with emotions and then we justify with our minds. It's rarely a very analytical thing. We may have come to the conclusion that we needed something fairly analytically, but we were having a problem and we're like, I want.
Mhm.
to solve that. I need to solve that. I have a desire that's a compelling desire to solve it. So now I'm there, I'm going, what we don't realize is the sale is usually ours to lose.
Yeah, absolutely. And the higher the ticket is, the more the experience of that sale is going to make the difference as to whether or not you close them as a customer,
100%.
because the risk is higher,
Yeah.
right? With big dollars. So let's talk about just quickly when you're doing digital online sales, kind of what would you say are the three main purposes of running regular digital advertising?
The first thing we want to think about is making people aware,
Yeah.
strangers aware. That could happen in the sales process, a real sales process with a real human being in cold calling. But again, like I said, that's an outlier. Really, what you're looking at is you're looking at your marketing assets, your marketing process and activities, whatever that looks like, even if it's the salesperson going out and just networking,
Mhm.
you're looking for strangers to become aware.
Yep.
The second thing is then how do you take those strangers? And we talked about this in the video on advertising and PR, but how do you then increase the frequency or the repetition with those folks? And that's a really powerful part of the marketing, advertising, sales process.
And then the other part, I think the third part would be to actually be in front of them when they need what you have to offer, right? So that the repetition begins to build the opportunity for them to see what it is that you are offering closely aligned with when they actually are looking for it.
Because there's that point in which most people are not ready to buy something because they don't have a need for it. But there's lots of things we will need that I don't need to think about who you are. I don't need to remember your company. But when I get there, I'm like, I'm going to go with where's the quickest place for me to get it? What am I thinking for automatically?
What if I'm selling, whether it's a product or a service, something that really is like nobody really needs that? Like, need is an interesting word, right?
Right.
So how does your sales and marketing process impact that, moving this from something that is just that would be amazing to have if I just had extra money somewhere stashed away,
Right.
to kind of moving into that, I need to have it.
When you get into this conversation, a couple of things start to come up. The first thing that comes up is an opinion or a philosophy that you shouldn't sell what people don't want. You want to solve a problem. If you can solve a problem, move forward. There are people who come up with stuff that do not solve any problem that people have. It's like, I had this great idea. There's a 90% business failure rate. Part of that failure rate is people who think I have this thing that I think would be really cool and everybody should want. They would never pay for it, but they expect somebody else to pay for it.
Yeah.
That's never going to work. But there's another category that falls into the I don't need, it doesn't solve a normal problem, and that is luxury products.
Yep.
And luxury products are a whole different thing, and they actually do solve a problem. They solve a problem for those of us that want to do something extra,
Mhm.
but it might be every once in a while, like a big trip,
Mhm.
vacation, a fancier vacation, going on a cruise like our friends just did. They went on a Disney cruise. Going on a Disney cruise is different than going on a celebrity cruise which is a
Viking
brand,
cruise.
or a what?
Viking.
A Viking cruise.
So much
Again, those are celebrities a little higher line. Viking is definitely a much higher line. But then you've got your princess cruises and all this kind of stuff. There is different levels. They're all special, but some of them are extra. They cost more. The luxury is higher in the midst of it, or the perceived luxury is higher in it. And so when you're walking through these things, you're thinking, okay, luxury, how am I going to tell somebody that they want it? How do I sell a $100,000 BMW, Mercedes, a Rolex?
Right. What am I speaking to?
And in the midst of it, we start to think about the things of copy that we need to write, because we want to make sure that there's two ways to actually build into making sure your marketing is helping your sales. One of them is building those impressions.
Yep.
But the other one is the copy.
Yeah.
Let's come back to luxury in a second. The first thing that you want to really think about is making sure you have a very strategic plan on your repetition. It has to be. You don't want to overwhelm people, but you need to make sure that you're in front of them enough. Like when you're talking to somebody, hey, could you remind me to do this? I want you to remind me, not bug me. I want you to remind me, not nag me. Uh,
Go away.
This is not helpful, whether it's Siri reminding you and becoming a nag, or it's
5 emails a day.
leave me
Nobody
alone.
needs that.
But if I'm being reminded, what we talk about is a frequency of about 3 times a week. If you can do 3 times a week and you do it 52 weeks a year, you're building into a long-term memory, and you have the opportunity, even if it's not a great written ad or great written experiences, you have that frequency. It's very strategic and it has lots of meat to it that we've talked about in other videos. But you want to do that because you can build those connections of trust and reputation very easily with that if you just think long term. The second one is how well you write the copy.
Absolutely.
What do we mean by copy?
The words that you put on the page, the digital or whatever page, the words that you actually write that convey your brand's message or reputation or what it is that you're trying to get them to do. And it is a big deal. And we talk about writing compelling copy because there's nothing that draws somebody in more than well-written stuff. And there's so much out there that's not well-written.
Absolutely. And compelling copy closes. I was looking for 3 C's. Compelling copy closes sales without tricking people. It's actually compelling copy that says it's moving them. Well, how do we move people and move their emotions? Because again, we're thinking if we can get their emotions, the mind will follow. And part of that is actually in an ethical sales process, what you're doing is you're speaking to their needs. You're speaking to them. You're speaking to their needs. And you're describing an ideal future that they actually want. And if you can articulate it and frame your marketing assets and activities and your sales conversation as part of the marketing continuation of the marketing activities and bring continuity, now all of a sudden we are increasing the opportunity for better quality conversations, better quality leads to your sales page and your website, and literally, ultimately, more conversions in your sales process.
Right. Which is what everybody needs and wants and must have.
So when we're talking about all this marketing and sales together, the major point of this entire process is sales is not something separate from marketing. No. Sales is actually in marketing. It's part of the overall marketing process. And when you have a marketing strategy that's designed with that larger holistic perspective in mind, every piece gets stronger and the outside benefit or the end benefit is much more leveraged, much more significant, and means more value to you and your company.